This is part 5 of my quintessential breakdown of quintessential quintuplets. If you haven't seen the other 4 parts yet, I suggest watching those. Links will be in the description. And before I go any further, this is the first part that will be using clips from Season 2 of the anime. There was a change in studios between Seasons 1 and 2, and as such the art style was altered slightly to more closely match that of the manga. The biggest difference being Futaro's eyes, which did not have a canon eye color until Volume 12 of the manga, which came out after Season 1 of the anime had wrapped up production. Chapters 33 through 38 of the manga is another in-between arc. This time bridging the legend that binds to the 7 Goodbyes arc. But there's a bit more cohesion than there was in the lead up to the legend that binds. Many of these chapters focus on Futaro's past and answer important questions about the true nature of his motivations and how deep the bonds of fate are. It also sets up important developments for Miku, Yotsuba, and Itsuki that will pay off later on. If there's one complaint I can muster, it's that this in-between arc goes on a little too long. Much of the 2 arcs it's bridging form the backbone of Nino's character arc. And the relative lack of Nino in these chapters means that there's no immediate buildup between her thanking Futaro during the bonfire and becoming the catalyst for the 7 Goodbyes arc. But these chapters make up for it by establishing how much Itsuki has changed throughout the story, which will form the other half of the catalyst for the next arc. And she is just as important for bringing Futaro's past up and becoming the first person he told about the reasons that he studies. Chapter 33 starts off with the memory of when Futaro met the mysterious girl in Kyoto. He's begun thinking about her a lot more ever since Ichika asked him why he studies in the fireworks arc. He doesn't remember much about that day, and we get very little insight on what he was like before that. He's in the hospital following his sickness during the field trip. It was the girls that sent him to the hospital and threw tons of money at the problem to make sure he was alright. And as the adopted daughters of a doctor, they're probably used to going to the doctors for any slight illness. Especially in Japan, which has a lot of germophobic customs, like how you're expected to wear a face mask if you have so much as a stuffy nose. Futaro is also in denial and singularly focused on getting back to school. He doubts that they were there for him, he still doubts that they are his friends, he's still trying to treat them as nothing more than professional obligations. He doesn't realize how much they've changed and how much they've changed him, and he doesn't realize that because he doesn't know that one of them was there in Kyoto 5 years earlier. Nino is the first to visit him and sets the record straight while saying how worried the others were. This is a point where Nino is conflicted. Her better, more dare I say maternal instincts have kicked in for Futaro, and she's in denial because of how much she still doesn't like him as a person. But she did give him the charm that Kentaro gave her, and Kentaro was actually Futaro, so the charm actually returned to the proper place. Nino hides as the others come, and once again we see the different dynamics. Nino is conflicted because she can't admit that she's warming up to him. Ichika, Miku, and Yotsuba are in love and wish him well, low-key flirt with him, and offer their company. But Futaro is still insensitive to stuff like that and tries shooing them away. Ichika has the most interesting reaction of the 3, and it follows up on what she said in the prior arc. She's decided to stay in school because she's falling for Futaro. She finally has a reason to study, even though he's unsociable, tactless, and kinda mean. After eating some food with them, he starts to feel better and looks at his horoscope again. At first it was really bad, but after feeling the effect that they're having on each other, it's a lot better. He's no longer singularly focused on study. He wants to get back to school because of the 5 idiots that need his help. Then his heart closes a little bit because he finds out they were originally there to get vaccinations. And I want to note that Nino says she's scared of stuff like that, and that might be because of how their mom died. And in these exchanges we get our first look at Maruo Nakano. Even though it's not revealed until after 7 Goodbyes, this physician is actually their father. And Futaro recognizes his voice from their phone call, but because he's bad with faces and his memory is fuzzy, he's unable to place the face or the voice. In his dream, he places it correctly for an instant, but when he stirs awake, there's only Itsuki, and he's brought back to the present. Itsuki may not be the girl from the picture, but she is just as important in addressing it and getting Futaro to move on from the past as anyone that was directly involved in those events. Everyone else came as just a formality, but Itsuki came with a purpose. the same one she promised to fulfill when he first got sick. This is something really personal and embarrassing for Futaro. It could be he's ashamed that as much as he's decried the idea of romantic endeavors, his whole worldview was given to him by a cute girl. But Itsuki is determined and the stalemate causes more embarrassment, so he relents and starts telling her. The truth is, he was a little punk ass shit as a middle schooler. He was a bully and a delinquent, but he was also a vacuous little waste of space with no drive to achieve. In many ways, he was similar to Ichika and Nino. He was one of the cool kids who acted all cool to make up for his inadequacies. The closest thing he had to friends were Takabayashi and Sanada. We find out later that Takabayashi was kind of the Futaro to his Ichika. And she was also his first crush, but she was always closer to Sanada, who was one of the smart, nerdy kids who was good at studying and everything else Futaro wasn't at the time. As much as he might have cared for Takabayashi, all his efforts of being cool were a waste of time because Sanada was just a better fit for her. In a way, one thing that didn't change was his tunnel vision. The Futaro of the present sees studying as the only thing necessary and everything else is a waste of time. Futaro of the past sees studying as a waste of time and only needs his camera. But that's the root of his fear. He thinks everyone will eventually throw out all that is unnecessary. And that means one day, Takabayashi will discard him as well. He runs off on his own to cut out the reminder of his own vacuousness and ends up getting in trouble. But then a girl comes to his rescue. He's innocent in what he's being accused of, but did something far more embarrassing. And in this embarrassment, this girl came to him with a smile. Though we get more of it later on and from more perspectives as well, what's important is that she gave him something to live for. And together they made a promise to set an example for their loved ones, studying hard to help and support the people that they care about. The Futaro of the present studies hard to set an example for and support Raiha. As the story progresses, that sphere of influence grows to encompass all 5 of the Quints. And just as an aside, if this gag about aliens on TV ends up tying in with Neji's new Sentai series, I will kinda chuckle, I guess. With that, he ends the story. He only wanted to humor her as thanks for what she had done for him, but she understands the important part. This person, whoever she is, had a profound impact on him that can't be properly measured. And this clever panel shows the reaction to that revelation. With the way it's framed, what we see, and more importantly, what we don't see, it could be Itsuki smiling and gaining some hope for herself and her sisters, but we later find out it's actually Yotsuba, happy that Futaro remembers that day and holds it in such reverence. As the chapter draws to a close, Itsuki's words echo the girl from back then. She wonders if she could become someone necessary like him. If it's in her power, she will succeed with his help. She fully accepts him as her tutor at this moment, and even brings a charm she got in Kyoto 5 years earlier. An identical charm to the one the girl bought 5 of. And she doesn't remember if she bought it herself or if someone else did. Though given how this plotline plays out, I think she does remember and is keeping it close to her chest until she can confirm for herself. But for Futaro, it makes him suspect that the girl in the picture is in fact one of the Quints. After what happened at the end of the field trip and what Futaro began suspecting, he becomes determined to tell the Quints apart. It's easy when they're wearing their usual outfits, accessories, and hairstyles, so he puts it to the test. It's still annoying to me that he can't get them right when they look like this. Despite having the same face, Neji has a tendency to give them different levels of shading around the eyes and shapes of the mouth. A Miku smile looks different from a Nino smile, and their hairstyles are so different that even pulling it in a ponytail isn't enough to hide who's who. But maybe that's because I love these girls and Futaro doesn't yet. And keep in mind that canonically they do have the same hair color and the differences are only for our benefit as the audience. But come on, Yotsuba is practically wearing a name tag. Both the Quints have a lot of fun with this. One of them walks around in a towel just to give him a hard time. They all give him failing test papers with their names ripped off to see if he can find out which one is which. Of course he suspects Yotsuba first because she has a history of 0-point papers. Later, Miku says he can tell them apart by their mole placements, which hers is on her breast, I guess, which he's all for showing off. It's always the quiet ones, I swear. said the quiet one. And Ichika jokes about a secret sixth sibling, and Yotsuba actually believes her because, well, they're all dumb, but Yotsuba is a special kind of dumb. But it is Yotsuba that teaches him something handy. Love is the key. Whoever truly loves these girls will always be able to tell them apart. That's what their mother said, and it was a philosophy carried down from their grandfather. All 5 of them can do it, and Maruo will later be shown to do it. But at this point in the story, Futaro can't. Love is treated on the same level as a superpower or a technique. It's difficult for them to explain, though Miku and Nino do point out some character differences in how Neji draws them. Futaro does constantly treat this like he treats any other test, one that requires studying. And one thing Futaro has picked up on is study and handwriting habits. As nonsensical as it may seem, the love thing and handwriting habits are almost a real thing. It's all about individualism. In situations where people know twins, it's common for them to start telling them apart once they get to know them on a personal level in isolation. The way you start characterizing them based on how they word things, how they carry themselves, and any other habits they form. One such habit is handwriting. Twins, and in this case quintuplets, almost never have the same handwriting. And since Futaro has spent so much time going over their work, he's picked up on these habits. The culprit of these tests doesn't have the eraser smudges Itsuki does, has better kanji than Yotsuba, but worse spelling than Miku. The paper isn't as messy as Ichika, but not as neatly folded as Nino's. He tests their handwriting and guesses that the culprit is Ichika, which he's right, the one in the towel was Ichika, but he made the mistake of assuming it was just one girl, which is actually kind of a neat tie-in to the Kyoto girl later on. Much like the Quints, he tried looking at the test as a collective, 5 parts of a whole. This could also be a hint that 3 of these 5 play a significant part in the Kyoto girl subplot. Upon inspecting things further, he doesn't arrive at the correct answer. They all got 0 points on different assignments. And as they fuss at Futaro's victory, Itsuki is the only one who confronts him about the true nature of this test. But his memory is clear on one thing. The girl in his memory said that she'd put in 5 times the effort to set an example for everyone. Someone so determined to better herself could never be one of these 5 failures. And just to prove his point, he asks outright and none of them answer. Because the only one that truly knows what he's talking about is the one person who is all too familiar with how much of a failure she is. And is far too embarrassed at her own inadequacies to let Futaro know how far she's fallen. It's a lot easier to make him think she was always academically challenged. In hindsight, this is for the best. Even though this does have long-term consequences, in the even longer term, everything does work out. That might not have happened had Yotsuba confessed outright. Ignoring the damage this would likely do to her sisters, particularly Miku, we see Futaro's own mental image of the girl in the picture. He's biased in letting his preconceived notions about this girl blind him from the truth. There's the Lee Atwater quote of "perception is reality." Futaro is not mentally ready to accept that the girl he admires so much is actually a dumbass failure of a student, and if he found out here, he might have become disillusioned and it could compromise future development, especially considering what happens in the next 2 chapters. But for now, Futaro is satisfied with his progress and stops trying so hard. It will be a long time before he comes across a similar problem, but by then he'll be a lot closer to figuring out the solution himself, which would make the accomplishment more meaningful than if Itsuki took him aside and told him the truth. The most important thing a writer or critic can ask is this: what does the character want? The strength of the story is directly linked to how invested the audience gets, and the level of investment is directly linked to the answer to this question. A strong answer can turn a decent story into a masterpiece, and a weak answer can turn an exceptional story into a messy, unfocused slog. By chapter 36, we have several answers to this question for Futaro, Miku, and Ichika. At this point, Nino and Itsuki are still in the midst of their initial arcs and thus are on the precipice of changing their answers to this question. And the one we know the least about is Yotsuba. What does Yotsuba want? The question completely drives chapters 36 and 37 and eventually becomes the single most important question in the series. Or at the very least is the one with the widest implications and the largest impact on everyone else's development. Even though the Labor Thanksgiving Day mini-arc focuses on Yotsuba, the first ones we see are Miku and Ichika. They both want to independently spend the holiday with Futaro as thanks for helping them. I like to think Ichika is bundled up this way because she just woke up, would most certainly be naked, and since this is late November in the Northern Hemisphere, is probably cold. The more important observation is that they both make it sound like a date. Miku has completely embraced her feelings and wants it to sound like a date, thus making the event more impactful. Need I remind you that these girls were sheltered and had very little interaction with boys before meeting Futaro. So even the more extroverted Ichika and Nino have never had a boyfriend and don't really know how to be romantic. So imagine how giddy Miku would be going on her very first date ever. Ichika, on the other hand, is more hesitant. She's still denying her feelings because of everything that happened during the bonfire and her own feelings for Miku. But she keeps her resolve since it's a holiday and they're only friends, so it's not that important, right? Not that either possibility matters because Futaro would rather spend the holiday studying, just like he tried to do during the fireworks arc. Not to say that he hasn't changed. Whereas in the fireworks arc, he was getting frustrated with the fact he kept thinking about the Quints while studying, where here he revels in it, hoping that his drive will motivate them to do better. Raiha teases him for this again as she heads out for her holiday plans. And it's here that Raiha gives him a push. She reminds him how much Yotsuba helped him, and how many of the stories he had from the field trip involved her. And by push, I mean she guilt trips him. Yotsuba is so surprised by the seemingly out-of-character move that she asks if he's sick again. But he is grateful and knows the right thing to do is to get her some kind of gift. Yotsuba has the perfect opportunity to act selfishly, just like Miku and Ichika were going to do. But instead she acts selflessly and uses this opportunity to teach Futaro about the girls in a subtle way. It's also wholesome how she calls it a date, like just spending time with him is enough for her to call it a date. First she takes him to Itsuki's favorite restaurant, then she takes him to Miku's favorite spa. In both instances, she brags about her wealth, but also suggests taking him again with everyone at a later date. But she's trying to teach him a lesson for now. It doesn't matter where they go or how much money they spend, so long as they're together. This is why she was so excited just spending time with him. And this is also probably foreshadowing the honeymoon. After the spa, they go see the movie Ichika appears in, and then they go shopping and run into some trouble that probably only exists to create a cliffhanger for this 2-chapter arc. But by this point, Futaro is getting frustrated that she is not just telling him what she wants. He doesn't get it yet. Her desire is to just spend time with him while secretly giving him insight on the sisters. While shopping, they're mistaken for a couple, which isn't the first time this has happened to Futaro, and it's not the last time this would happen with Yotsuba. After suggesting they get matching outfits, Futaro sees Loli Kano in her. He pushes the thought away, but it's there. Even if for a second he starts feeling love towards Yotsuba and sees her for who she truly is. Right when he gets ready to buy her some clothes as a gift, she plays her hand a little too heavily and it clicks. Clothes shopping for Nino, movie for Ichika, spa for Miku, restaurant for Itsuki, but nothing completely for her. What does she want? Even Yotsuba doesn't quite know yet. And before she can think of something, Miku and Ichika show up to create the cliffhanger. Futaro predicts that they'll either be mad at him for rejecting them, or they'll tease him for being with Yotsuba. Both are terrifying possibilities as far as he's concerned. Yotsuba puts them both in a lewd situation in order to get them out, but it all works. They escape with Miku and Ichika none the wiser, then they run into Raiha. Letting her know what's going on isn't a big problem. After all, this was her idea. But they once again escape before Itsuki arrives. While it's not super important, this does show that Raiha and Itsuki are close enough to hang out together on their free days, which helps smooth over a certain plot point coming in the next arc. They arrive at Yotsuba's favorite park. While she was more than happy to show Futaro a side of her sisters he hadn't seen, she's more trepidatious to reveal so much about herself. I like the word Futaro uses in this translation, ordinariness. It harkens to something that he says later. He may be an exceptional student, but he's far from a normal person. And it's his relationship with the Quints that teaches him what it means to be a friend and be a man. This is the first time we see him having legitimate fun doing something non-academic. And it's also the first time Yotsuba says something snarky about him. Sure, she had criticized his rudeness, but here she criticizes his childishness. Though it's this moment that reminds her of what he was like back in the day and how far he's come. It could be disheartening at first, but their journeys parallel each other in many ways. This scene does the same for Futaro what Yotsuba's future academic success will do for her. Even though this girl, this child, wants so desperately to be seen as a grown woman by the man she loves, she is watching that very same man embrace a kind of childishness she wishes to abandon. It's fulfilling and the only look at the other side of the veil she'll get for a while. She joins him and opens up about herself and her desires, albeit she still isn't direct. This is her favorite spot because it overlooks a bustling suburban neighborhood. Every single light you can see is a family, and the thought of so many different people all having homes to return to makes her feel fuzzy. She jumps off the swing once again, reminding Futaro of the wisdom and passion of the girl in the picture. Futaro follows suit, and this happens.
Not you!
He laughs. For the first and only time in the manga, he laughs. This is what Yotsuba wanted all along. All she wanted was to make him happy. All of this, the restaurant, the spa, the movie, the shopping, the park, all of it was an attempt at making Futaro's life easier and more fulfilling. Futaro picked up on that, but he's missing one valuable piece of information that would have allowed him to figure everything out. Yotsuba loves him. Always has, and always will. But she also loves her sisters. She loves them all far more than she loves herself, which is why she instantly suggests they all come together here someday, which they will towards the end of the series. Chapter 38 is one of the only chapters that even gets close to being called filler. It's a slice of life chapter focusing on Miku and Ichika. It starts with a summary of their academic progress. Their average score was 20 during the pre-test and 26 during the midterms. If they keep this pace, they should be able to score at least 30 points on all subjects and pass the final test of the term by the skin of their teeth. Yotsuba wants to help out the track team, and Nino wants to take Itsuki to the movies. Itsuki is a little more hesitant to go because it's scary, but that could also be a hint that she just wants to study instead. And Nino insists that she doesn't want to be alone. Even though for this chapter, this is all seemingly throwaway dialogue serving as an excuse to get 3 of the 5 girls out of the house for this chapter, it all sets up their conflicts for the next arc. Even the fact that Ichika and Miku stick with Futaro is an indicator of the more helpful role they'll play when we get to that next arc. Albeit Ichika does try getting them out of the house. She even says she'll congratulate Miku if she starts going out with Futaro, which, yep, that still stings. This is followed up by Futaro nearly confessing to what he did on Labor Thanksgiving, and then a classic setup punchline where it seems like Ichika is making up an excuse, but really does have to watch her boss's daughter. This little girl, Kiku, is pretty precocious and well-behaved, but she also demands Futaro to play house with her. This is where things stop getting fillery, and this encounter starts giving us insight into the girls. Kiku wants Futaro to act as her father, and she wants Miku and Ichika to act as his associates who are in love with him. So it's a pretty easy role for the girls that will only get easier later in the story. The more important thing is that there is no mother. Ichika's boss is a single father. The lack of a maternal figure is something Futaro and the girls can relate to, even if the circumstances in all 3 cases were vastly different. Futaro, bless his heart, tries making this about studying too, and in doing so says the old failure breeds success proverb, which Miku will throw back in his face at the end of the next arc. Miku and Ichika get pretty into their roles and compete to be Kiku's new fake mom, which she takes offense to. She doesn't need another mom like the one who left her with her dad. And here we see some of Futaro's development peek through. He scolds her, telling her she doesn't need to be precocious and there's nothing wrong with her acting like a kid. Miku notes how even when he's being a complete ass, he really does care about people and wants what's best for them. It was this warmth that made Miku open up and stop being so cold in the first place. And it's this warmth that spurs her to ask him out. Though since they had been playing house, Futaro fails to pick up on her sincerity because she chickens out. But in the height of the game, he takes it a step further and nearly causes Miku to explode. The other three come back and join in the game in less desirable roles. It's funny, but nothing really important until Miku reaffirms to Ichika what she said during the bonfire. She wants Futaro to herself, but she also likes it when the six of them are all together. That's when things are at their most fun. And with that, everything and everyone is set up for what will be three of the most important arcs in the entire series. We know the characters, we know what they're about, we've gotten plenty of hints at the deeper emotions they're all feeling. Now it's the time to grow up and say goodbye to the things that are holding them back. And that's the crux of the next arc. This concludes part 5 of my quintessential breakdown of Quintessential Quintuplets.